Welcome everybody to our second in the series of our Cycles of Life Yangsheng uh, um, series. And we're on to the summer seasons. As I was saying, today is 5th of May, and that is the first day of summer in the Chinese calendar. Um, so I'm really delighted to introduce Henry McCann, who uh, I came to know through his website predominantly because Henry is one of the few people who writes in a lot of detail on the solar times, which is a subject that I've become really interested in over the years. I've also got Henry's book on pricking the vessels, which is he's quite practiced on the history and practice of bleeding techniques, bloodletting, and he's also an avid teacher of Tung. Also published a few books on that as well, and he's really just a generally enthusiastic practitioner of Chinese medicine, of Qigong and Tai Chi and Yangsheng. And we're really lucky to have him here for the start of our summer season. So thank you, Henry. I'll hand over to you and take
Thanks.
it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everyone, for showing up today. I have to say, this is the kind of, this is going to be a fun day, or at least a fun hour and a half or so. And It's a topic I really like to talk about. Most people probably know me as a teacher of Dong's acupuncture, but that's mainly because it's my continuing medical education teaching, my seminar teaching. That's mainly the topic. In reality, what I've taught most over the years is topics related to classical texts. So I was a faculty member at the Pacific College of Health and Science in New York City for 16, 17 years or so. And what I did most of the time there was teach Neijing and Nanjing. And as part of that, because the nourishing life tradition is strong within those texts, something we talk about. At the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine, I was also on faculty, regular faculty, where I taught geriatric medicine. And as part of that, the Yangsheng, and including the topic of the seasonal nodes, was something we lectured on for the doctoral students. So I did their advanced studies program. So even though it's not what I've known about in terms of continuing education seminars, it's actually what I've taught more of over the years, and I really like the topic. I think it's a really important topic. And so that's good. So today is the first day of summer. So we'll spend the period of time we have to today discussing the seasonal nodes and general ideas of summer. What I will do is start because again, there's always this discussion, and I agree it's probably summer all the time in Spain for our listeners in Spain, as Alex mentioned. But what I'll do to begin with is sort of really define what we're talking about when we're talking about seasons, the summer, so that we have that sort of reference point. And I'm sure you've sort of talked about that a bit already, but we'll go over it anyway and see why today is, at least astronomically speaking, the appropriate time for beginning of summer, right? There is the realization, of course, that it's going to get hotter as we go forward into July and August. Most of us live in a climate where that is most likely the case. I suspect that the seasonal fluctuations in climate in the northeastern United States, where I am, and in the UK is fairly similar. You maybe don't have it quite as hot and humid as we get by the time we get to July and August, but probably not that far off from where we are. So the seasonal fluctuations are going to be relevant, at least in terms of the general guidelines we're going to talk about. Okay, so first what I will do for people who are here is I will put the PowerPoint PDF. If you want the PDF, the presentation, I'll put that in the chat box. And that'll also, I think, be available on the website later. And let's get into it. And we are a small enough group. If you have questions, feel free to pop it into the chat. Okay, so I like this picture. You may be able to see, Alex, you may be able to notice those as well. This is a sundial at the Confucius Temple, one of the main Confucius temples in Beijing. I took a photo of a couple of years ago, and you'll see the stems and branch characters on the gradations, which is, I think it's a fun little picture. So first of all, whenever we're talking about anything in Chinese medicine, It really means that we need to go back and re-examine fundamental principles. And it's only through an examination of fundamental principles eventually that we'll have a better idea of exactly how we're defining things like the seasons, the seasonal nodes, and then understanding what recommendations might be appropriate for those times when we're talking about Yangsheng or sort of nourishing life principles. So in case you weren't convinced yet, we go back to, the early books that are most important. So yin and yang is the fundamental concept that we're going to be going back and discussing over and over again. Really, if we understand yin and yang, we'll understand the extrapolations of that in terms of 5 phases, and then how we're applying that clinically, either for remediation or prevention, right? So this is one of my favorite quotes. This is from the 5th chapter of the Suen. Yin and yang are the Tao of heaven and earth, the guiding principle for all things, the father and mother of changes and transformations, the fundamental source of life and death, and the palace of the spirit brilliance, the Shenming, right? So this is it. Yin and yang is where we start. Yin and yang is eventually where we go. It's the first thing you learn in acupuncture school, I assume. That's one of the first things we teach our students here as a basic theoretical concept. And then we get more and more and more complicated, and then eventually realize we only become more complicated so we can go back to the fundamental principles. I have interns in my clinic most days, and last week we had my intern and I were having a discussion about a patient, and I asked them to think about why we're using a certain point for this patient. And she started going into all these, oh, it's this channel, it has to this, and this is where that channel goes, and these are the signs and symptoms. That's this point. I said, just stop. Go back and first ask yourself, what is the yin and yang or 5-phase relationship? That's the fundamental place we start, and that eventually is the place that we end in understanding how we apply all these different theories to, again, treatment and remediation or prevention of disease. Okay. So when we're looking at that, then this little phrase here from the 2nd chapter of the Suen, in my opinion, is the sort of fundamental place where we start understanding how we apply these theories for prevention of disease, for Yangsheng. So this quote says, hence the sages in spring and autumn nourish the yang, and in autumn and winter nourish the yin. And this way they follow their roots. Okay? So one more time, the sages in spring and summer nourish the yang, and in autumn and winter nourish the yin, and this way they follow their roots. Now, what we have to do is, when we're looking at a phrase like this, understand that when early texts are talking about nourishing yang or nourishing yin, they don't mean it in the same way that we do in a modern TCM context, right? So in a modern TCM context, we say, the way we nourish yin is by giving something like Liu Wei Di Huang Wan or some other formula that has yin supplementing yin, nourishing, moistening functions. It's not what they mean here, right? And we can go to one of the commentaries, and this is a commentary by Ma Yuantai, who was a really important commentator. I think he was Tang Dynasty. He says, the myriad beings come to life in spring, grow in summer, are gathered in autumn, and stored in winter. That's going to be very important, and we'll look at that quote actually in the next slide. These regularities of yin and yang in the course of the 4 seasons are the root and source of the myriad beings. Hence, in spring and summer, those sages who adhered to the Tao of nourishing their genesis and growth, they nourished the yang qi. While in autumn and winter, those who adhered to the Tao of nourishing their gathering and storage, they nourished their yin qi. So that doesn't necessarily mean that in the winter we should take cooling yin tonics, and in the summer we should take all the hot things we can, right? What this means is that fundamentally, spring and summer are yang seasons. Autumn and winter, or fall and winter, are yin seasons. So when they say here we nourish the yang or we nourish the yin, it means we adhere to the guiding principle of the movement of the season, for whether it's a yang season or a yin season. So instead of seeing this as we nourish for example, nourish the yin in autumn and winter as taking yin tonics, what they mean is that we nourish the yin by adhering to the movement of yin in the natural environment. which means we are in the movement of bringing things in, securing, gathering, and eventually moving into storage. Likewise, now that we're moving into summer, and shortly again we'll see why summer doesn't mean it has to be the hottest time of year is the beginning of summer. It's this time of year is characterized by the explosion of growth of outward movement, which is what summer really stands for. Get the idea? So one of the ways we're going to nourish and be in harmony with summer is by allowing that outward expanding movement to happen in our lives, in the activities we do, etc. And in doing so, then we can stay in harmony with the movement of the season and be healthy. Some patients are sick enough that they can't be moving out, they can't be expanding. Why? Because their personal condition means that they have to ignore the season and really, for example, someone who's really, the kidneys have left the building, right? If there's no more kidney qi left, then it doesn't matter what time of year it is, they have to behave as if it's winter so that they can stay in that movement of let's nourish the kidney. Got it? But if the person is relatively healthy and just trying to stay in harmony with the season, then they can fluctuate how they eat, what they do, herbs they take, for example, based on the movement of the seasons. Get the idea? So now this is looking at the seasons through the larger lens of yin and yang. And what the commentary here is doing is giving us the beginning of how do we understand the seasons through the lens of those 5 phases. And that's where we get, how am I getting this word? There we go. That's when we move into this type of quotation. This is the quotation where we're starting to understand now the gradations of yin and yang through the lens of 5 phases, because 5 phases is nothing more than the movements of yin and yang in a little bit more detail. We can get in further detail when we get into things like stem and branches, but 5 phases is the next sort of layer down. So this is from the 44th chapter of the Ling Shu. So this is a conversation. So if you're not familiar with Neijing in general, oftentimes the chapters are written as a conversation between Huangdi and Qibo, his physician's tutor, basically. So here Huangdi says, tell me about the qi of the 4 seasons, right? And Qibo replies, spring engenders, summer flourishes, autumn harvests, and winter stores. Okay, and these characters, this sort of, you'll see these are, I think you can see my cursor here, right? So this is spring brings movement of engenderment, birth. So this sheng is in the same as like shengjiang or shengdi huang, means fresh, new. In Chinese, a shengre is or in Japanese, tanjobi. That's the same character for a birthday. So it's really like the beginning of everything. This is summer, jiang, means it's sort of like the fulminant growth of everything. Autumn is the movement of harvest, and winter stores. We're going to see these characters over and over again. In fact, these are the same characters that the commentary in the previous slide was using. Okay, so this is the beginning of the discussion of how do we break down the 5 phases in terms of slightly yang, more yang, slightly yin, more yin, right? And then it goes on to say this is the constant of qi, and humans also respond to this movement. So not only is this the description of the 5 phases, this is it. This is how the qi moves in the universe. Every time we go through the 4 seasons, this is what happens. Every time we go through the period of a day, because it also says one single day is divided into the 4 seasons. A day is the same thing, from sun up, high noon, sundown, midnight. Same exact pattern. Every time we take a breath in and out, it's the same pattern. The course of our life from birth, growth, maturation, decline, and death is the same pattern. These cyclical patterns play out over and over again. It's just in the course of the year, it's easy to sort of see it because it's a more dramatic and slow change. Okay. So here's where we get this diagram then, that if any of you've seen my writing, this diagram, I use this all the time. So we're seeing here is, this is over here, spring engenders, summer flourishes, autumn harvests, winter stores, and in the middle we have hua, transformation, which essentially is the earth phase. Or I'm trying to get everyone to stop saying earth phase, or if you say earth element, that's the worst thing you can say. Don't say that anymore. The better is the soil phase. the dirt phase, because in Chinese, the word tu that we use for the five phases that we usually translate as earth is different than di, like tian di, like heaven and earth, right? Because heaven and earth, that's the earth, as in the big earth. Tu means like the dirt, the soil, stuff that you can plant things in. So the soil phase or the earth phase is that glue that holds it all together, that allows for the transformation of the season to happen constantly. So for example, those of you, if you're familiar with the 12 earthly branches, the 12 earthly branches basically give us the hours of the day or the months of the year. The earth is the transition between all the other phases. So it'll go wood, wood, earth, fire, fire, earth, metal, metal, earth, water, water, earth, right? And if that's confusing, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter so much for the context of today. But this is the cycle that we're going to start seeing. And summer then becomes this top of that circle. So summer is the greatest yang. So oftentimes we can refer to summer as the Taiyang, which is not the same as the Taiyang channels, right? One of the confusing things about Chinese medicine is we use the same terms to describe different phenomenon. So like Taiyang can be, the heart is the Taiyang because it is the fire. Fire is the greatest yang, where wood is yang, but not as yang, right? Water is the greatest yin. Metal is yin, but not as yin. Okay? But that Taiyang is different from the Taiyang channel, bladder channel, or Taiyang stage, for example, of Sheng Han Lun. So they're same word that refers to different things. In the context of today, it's just important to remember that the summer, which is fire, is the greatest yang period of this whole cycle. And understanding that will help us, again, understand why we're going to talk about certain recommendations. Okay. And in case you thought maybe this doesn't make a difference, let's look at an inspirational quote from the chapter 13 of the Suen. This, we all like to complain about the kids today. So even 2,000 years ago, they were complaining about the kids today. So here's their complaint. When later generations treated a disease, then this was different. The treatments were not based on the four seasons. They no longer knew of the significance of the sun and the moon. They did not recognize whether the qi moved contrary to or followed its regular course. In other words, how is the qi in my body as a patient moving with or against the movement of the sun, the moon, the seasons, right? And the ideal was that the physician takes this into consideration in addition to just what you would do in terms of tongue and pulse. So your formulas might need to be different, or your acupuncture point prescription might need to be different during different times of the year to make it more appropriate to the patient. Okay. So what is the summer? So today is one of the 8, what they call, at least in Suen chapter 26. We only see this term once in the Neijing. The term is the 40 BAcC, so the 8 sort of orthodox points of the 4 seasons. What these referred to are the beginning of the 4 seasons, which is the beginning of summer, which is now, and then beginning of autumn, winter, spring, and then the solstices and the equinoxes. What we will see is, even though today in modern Western calendars, we count the solstices and the equinoxes as the beginning of the seasons, in the traditional Chinese context, the solstices and equinoxes are the midpoint of the seasons, and we'll see why shortly. Interestingly, in the European context, in traditional, like pre-modern times, the solstices and the equinoxes were also considered the midpoints, right? So when Shakespeare is writing A Midsummer's Night Dream, he's talking about around the time of the solstice, right? Midwinter festivals in Northern European countries happen around the time of winter solstice. So it's for some, I don't know exactly when we started making the solstices and equinoxes the beginning of the seasons, but in the traditional context, in the agrarian calendars, they're not. Okay. So then we come to the concept of how do we break down. I think everyone knows that there are 4 seasons, right? That's sort of a basic breakdown of the year. We can also break down the different smaller segments. So this is a quote that eventually comes from Suen chapter 9. It says 5 days is called a manifestation, a ho, an atmospheric manifestation. 3 Ho are a seasonal node, a qi or a jie qi. So the seasonal nodes then are, there are 24 of them in a year. If 5 days is a little mini season, it's a micro season, a 3 of the 5 days, which is a 15-day period of time, becomes one of these mini seasons. 6 chi are a season. So there are 6 mini seasons for each of the 4 main seasons. And then the 4 seasons of a year. All of them follow what is responsible for governing it. And what the commentary is on that, Wang Bing tells us that this line, each of them follows what is responsible for governing it, means that each time period is associated with the chi of the 5 phases by which it is ruled. So now we're getting into the fire time of year, and that's vital to understanding what we're going to be talking about otherwise. Okay? The 5 cyclical movements, in other words, the 5 phases, succeed one another, each of them governing the divisions of the year. When the days of an annual cycle are completed, this constitutes one cycle, after which it commences anew. So it's this big circle. When a time period begins, the respective chi spreads. So now we're going to see the spreading and growth of fire. So the reason why it's not as hot as it is now as it will be in the rest of summer is because we're just in the beginning of summer. Fire is just beginning to take over as the dominant movement in the natural environment. Eventually, fire will blossom and it will become more fire-like, more expansive, which means the heat will increase going down. And then over time, that will start moving inwards. And then metal will take over as the next movement. But metal will just be beginning movement. So August, which is the beginning of autumn, is still hot because we're seeing the remnants of the fire. Metal is just starting to take over, and it won't be until September, October that metal will really come to fruition, and then water will get the idea. So things are just in its nascency. So fire is just beginning to start its dominance in the 5 phases in terms of the environmental influences. Okay, and of course, in case you didn't believe me before, another quote, thus it is said, he who does not know what a year contributes to human health, basically in terms of what the seasons, all that, how that affects us, how the chi abound and weaken, and why repletion or vacuity arise, they cannot serve as a practitioner of medicine. So this was considered to be essential knowledge. Alex, even though despite what we were talking about in terms of modern maybe views on this was important, right? Keep in mind that physicians in the Han Dynasty were as much health coach as physician, right? These were people hired by wealthy families to keep them healthy as well as remediate disease. Okay, so when we're looking at the actual summer then, this is the breakdown of the sort of mini segments of the season. So here we have beginning of summer, which is approximately May 5th or 6th each year. This year it's May 5th, it's usually May 5th. The next, and we'll talk about each of these seasonal nodes when we start getting into it. The next one is called minor fullness, and we'll talk about the significance of the names. Bearded grain, then summer solstice, followed by minor heat and great heat. So it was not lost on the Chinese in traditional times that even after all of this in beginning, it's sort of the end of the summer that heat becomes the greatest, right? And we'll talk about why that's the case shortly. Now, if we're looking at this, the position on the ecliptic is the apparent angle of the sun in the sky throughout the course of the year. So one of the reasons why summer solstice is, and the word for summer solstice, shazhi, zhi means the apex or zenith of. So shazhi, summer solstice, is the zenith or apex of summer, because that is the moment, that's the time of the year where the sun is at the most direct angle it's going to be throughout all of the year. So if you didn't know, what's interesting, in the northern hemisphere, in the winter, we're actually mile-wise closer to the sun than we are in terms of the orbit, the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun. We're closer to the sun than we are in the summer. The difference is that the angle of the sun is more direct during the summer than it is the winter. So the position on the ecliptic is the angle, apparent angle in the sky the sun is at compared to the horizon. And there are plenty of YouTube videos that can describe this in more detail. We don't have time to go into too much detail today. So that means the sun is greater overhead. And one of the ways that we actually measured the seasons in ancient times, there's a really interesting book on mathematics that gives us the specific, you take a piece of wood, a pole, you put it in the earth like a sundial, and you can measure the season by the length of the shadow, right? So in winter solstice, the shadow will be the longest because the angle is the least direct, which means what? We have more yin because we see more of a dark shadow. Then in the summer, the shadow is the shortest because it's most directly overhead. And that position of the sun most directly overhead is what defines summer solstice when it is. So what we're seeing now is that the sun is getting higher and higher and higher in the sky on the ecliptic, which means it's more and more yang. The easiest way to notice this is the length of the day, right? So you guys in the UK, you're so much further north, like New York is about level with Rome, if you didn't know. So we're much further south than you are. It's crazy. Whenever I go visit Ireland in the summer, I feel like an insomniac because it's like 10 p.m., the sun is still up, and like by 4 a.m., it's like, it's back, right? So the days are getting longer and longer and longer, which means more and more yang in the environment, so that we're only 6 weeks away at this point from the days getting shorter again, which is why we're in the most yang period of time we're going to have of any time of year. Got it? So because now the days are the longest of the days will be the apex of yang, which is why the summer solstice is in the middle of summer, and that we are now at the beginning of that last 6 weeks of getting brighter, and then we're going to start seeing it getting slowly shorter after that. Everyone get the idea? Okay. So let's look at a little bit of how the Neijing gives us the big, broad brush strokes of how do we harmonize ourselves with the summer. This is a passage from the second chapter of the Suen. It's fairly well known. What it does is it defines each of the seasons in terms of the main theme and then what we do in order to stay within that theme. Okay, so here it says, the 3 months of summer denote opulence and blossoming. The chi of heaven and earth interact, and the 10,000 things bear fruit. So this is the essential definition of summer. It defines summer as the fire phase. Why? Because fire is the most yang of the 5 phases. And here it says the opulence and blossoming. This is everything is moving out as much as it possibly can. So like just last week, I'm a tree, if anyone out there grow tree peonies, I'm a tree peony fanatic. I'm just lucky enough to have a wife that is really good at gardening, because if it were up to me, they'd all be dead. But the tree peonies right now are in full bloom, and they are spectacular. The grass is growing faster than it will in July and August. So everything is moving out, expanding at the fastest rate it possibly can. So this first phrase here, opulence and blossoming, the 10,000 things bear fruit. So it's like flourishing. The last word there in this line here is the word shi, which means in modern TCM we usually use this word to describe like repletion or excess. This is why the English translation of excess for shi is a bad translation, because it can mean excess if in a patient it actually means too much, but it also means just a fullness and expansion that can also have a positive quality. So this is the course of the year where everything is full expansion. It starts with spring, the generation of, so Wang Bing, the commentary from this line by Wang Bing says, the generation of yang begins with spring, and when it comes to summer, yang abounds and all beings grow. So that's the basic definition of spring in this line. The next line starts giving us basic Yangsheng recommendations. So here it says, go to rest late at night and rise early. Never get enough of the sun. Let the mind have no anger. Stimulate beauty and have your elegance perfected. Cause the chi to flow away as if that what you loved were located outside. Okay, and so sometimes the Neijing is a bit cryptic, so let's take this little piece by piece. It says, go to rest late at night and rise early. So one of the symbols of the recommendations, because the classic texts tend to be very compact. They give us a lot of information in short spaces. So they're not going to give us a book of do this in the summer. They already told us what to do. We just have to sort of decode it to some extent. One of the ways that they tell us what to do for all of the 4-season recommendations is through sleep. So basically in springtime it says, you can get up a little early, but don't go crazy. You should still get to bed at a decent hour. Summer it says, have fun. Sleep, you can go to bed late, get up early, be more active. And then eventually when it comes to winter, it says you got to sleep. You got to sleep a lot more. That's the paraphrase at least. So why does it say go to rest late at night and rise early? Why? Certainly the days are longer than the other seasons. Since summer is the most yang, even though sleep is still important for our health, the active nature of summer means that we can also be more active. And we should be more active. It's the time of year to get up, get outside. It's appropriate for vacations, for travel, things that are more yang in terms of how do we live our life, which means that we can get away with a little less sleep. Now again, your kidney deficient patients where the kidneys have left the building, that doesn't matter. Why? Because they have a disease that looks like winter, which means they need to behave like it's still winter. They need to still get more sleep. But for the average person, you can get a little less sleep, you can become a little more active, and that puts us in the movement of what it means to be in summer. Okay? The next one here says, never get enough of the sun, let the mind have no anger, and things will, and then stimulate beauty and have your elegance perfected. So that basically means that things will start growing. Okay? So never get enough of the sun also means it's time to be outside more. Of course, many of us who live in northern climates can sometimes be pale, so you can still wear your hats. But it's time to be outside. What's really interesting here, it says, the next line where it says, let the mind have no anger, this is the warning of what happens when there's too much outside movement. Because the normal up and out expansive movement is appropriate. However, what anger is, remember, is it's a violent upwards and outwards movement of the chi, which is why it's associated with liver. Liver is coming up and out. Appropriate, not to say that anger is appropriate, but the appropriate up and out movement is the gentle movement of springtime that is birth, that's beginning, right? The onset of new projects is a birth of sort. It requires a burst of outward moving energy. But if there's too much outward moving energy, then that is potentially damaging. So in terms of TCM, we can just see this as a simple upsurgence of yang rooted in liver, which will then move upwards to harass the heart. And we can see symptoms such as heart fire. So in this very simple line here, it's saying we need to have this upward-outward movement. We can be more active, but if it goes too much, then that can also deplete the chi. Because while it's appropriate to move up and out, too much of that movement can deplete the internal storage of chi, which can then damage the kidney, liver, etc. Everyone got that? Is that okay? Okay. Then it says, this is in resonance with the chi of summer and is the Tao of the nourishment of the movement of growth. So here it says this is the in the word ing means in resonance with the movement with the chi of summer, and it's the yang jiang. It's how we nourish. This is the same character we saw with spring engenders, summer flourishes, autumn harvests, yin stores. So this is how we nourish that movement of growth up and out. let me see. I think there was a question. Yeah, so Olivia, it wouldn't surprise me. You know, you got that hot nature gets people up and out. Everyone's just tired and tired in the winter. Right, how to get out of this now? Okay. All right. So let's start talking more specifically about the seasonal nodes then. So this is the first one we're going to look at here. This is the first seasonal node starts today. This is the beginning of summer seasonal node.
Hi, Henry. Sorry, there seems to be a bit of audio interference. It's some, maybe it's the we can hear the paper or something rustling. I'm not sure
Or
what that is.
maybe it's my notes as I'm changing my pages.
Oh, okay, no worries. That's fine.
Yeah.
You're coming through clearly. It's just occasionally we
Oh
get
yeah.
that. That's fine.
It's probably me wrestling my papers. I still like I'm a paper person. So even though I can do the PowerPoint presentations, I have to have like what you don't see is my desk covered with all sorts of papers right now.
No
Keep me
problem.
on
Thanks,
track.
Henry.
All right. Okay.
Go ahead too.
So we are now in the beginning of summer, starting today. And so the seasonal nodes are all 15 or 16 days. You know, the problem with the calendar is that the year is not actually 360 days. If you have 15 days each for this mini seasons, that would add up to 360. So some of the seasonal nodes will have an extra day tacked onto it each year so that we can get to 365 days, right? So sometimes it may not be exactly 15, usually 15 or 16 days on occasion. So the beginning of summer starts today. What we will see as we go through all of these different seasonal nodes is that each of the seasonal nodes, when we're looking at Yangsheng or this nourishing life literature, there will be a to do and to avoid as recommendations for each of the seasonal nodes. So a lot of the literature that describes these sort of health nourishing practices will say, this time of year do this and try not to do this or try to minimize this. And so you'll see that as we go through the different seasonal node descriptions going forward. So again, this is the beginning of summer. It's because we are in that last 6 weeks before we get to the apex of summer where the sun is at its most direct angle, where the days will be getting longer and longer and longer before they start slowly getting shorter. So because of that, the first two seasonal nodes basically are symbolized by this, what you see here on the slide is called Qiangua. The Qiangua is the heaven hexagram. So it's all yang lines. That means this is the most yang period of time. Eventually, by the time we get to the summer solstice, we're going to see the reversion back towards yin in a very small but meaningful way. But this is where we are right now. As I said, my tree peonies are in full bloom. If you subscribe to my blog, I posted a picture of one of my peonies on my blog today. If you're on Instagram, I'm on Instagram as well. I'm just getting used to these newer, I'm a little behind since Instagram is new to me. I post peony pictures because it's a great thing to post. So the days are getting longer and brighter. We're only 6 weeks away from the days getting shorter again. So that means this is that expansion of yang. So what's also interesting though is that we can look at the calendar through a couple of different lenses, just like we can look at organs through a couple of different lenses. So even though we are in the fire time of year, what's interesting is that in terms of the months, so when we're talking about the months, we're looking at the months of the traditional Chinese calendar, meaning that we are currently in the fourth lunar month of the year, right? The beginning of the year in the Chinese context starts in February, beginning of February, which is the beginning of spring. So those of you who speak Chinese, or if you've studied any Chinese, might remember that the Chinese New Year is called Chunjie, the spring festival, because it's the beginning of the year, which means the lunar month that starts the year is usually sometime around the beginning of February. Sometimes it can be a little earlier in January, sometimes a little later in a couple weeks into February. That's the beginning of the year, which means that February, March, April, May is the fourth month of the Chinese calendar. If we think of the cycle of the channels, right? So here's your quiz. Ready? I used to be a high school teacher years ago, so you can't escape without a pop quiz once in a while. So in the time of the day, what is the first channel that starts the day. When you learn the cycle of the day, right? What's the first channel that starts? When you're looking at the cycle of the channels, what starts it? And your hint is when a child is born, what's the first thing, ideally, it should do? So it's not liver, it's actually lung. Lung is the beginning. So when you learn the cycle of the channels, you learn lung, large intestine, right? Stomach, spleen, and then it goes all the way, and liver is actually the end, right? Liver is going to be the end of that cycle. So this is interesting in that liver is the beginning in terms of the 4 phases. And that's why it gets a little confusing. So the movement of springtime is the movement of wood and liver. Got it? But the movement of the beginning of the day from 3 to 5 a.m. is the lung channel, right? So it's one of the interesting things it's telling us is that lung channel, right? Lung channel is metal. Got it? So what's the thing? No. Don't be sorry, because this is an important discussion to have. So what does, in TCM, what does lung do? What's the 2 primary functions of lung? If you go back to your TCM 101 class, what does lung do? You can type it in the box. And if it's too long, because we're on a time schedule today. So it receives chi, and where does it move that chi that it receives? What direction does it go? Right, down. So it goes, thank you, Olivia. Excellent. So it does depurative down bearing. So it down bears the clear, and then it moves things up to the surface, right? So like opening and closing of the pores, right? That is also lung. Let me point something out to you that you may not have noticed. Moving things to the surface has nothing to do with metal whatsoever, right? Moving down and in is metal. Moving up to the surface ain't metal because it's the opposite direction. But lung goes at 3 to 5 in the morning. 3 to 5 in the morning is the wood time of day because it's early spring right before dawn. And if you look at the 12 branches, the 12 earthly branches, the 3 to 5 a.m. branch is a wood branch. So lung is primarily metal, but it also has a wood nature as well, which describes why lung also does this sort of up and out bearing movement at the same time. So like many of us, organs are complicated creatures. So lung is mostly metal, but has a wood nature also in that it moves things up and out. So when we're looking at now this time of year, we are in May, which is the 4th month in the Chinese calendar. Fire, because it's the beginning of summer. But if we look counting of the 4th month, lung, large intestine, stomach, spleen. So in terms of the channels, if we overlay the channels on the 12 months like we do in the 12 hours of the day, in terms of the earthly branches, this month also has a spleen nature, which is why this is the time of year we can see, like as I'm sitting here right now, I'm metric impaired. You have to know that to begin with. So I have no idea what the Celsius is, but it's like it's only 70 degrees, fairly comfortable outside, but it's at like 85% humidity here, which means not so comfortable. So I'm going like this, even though it's not actually that warm, because this is the time of year where the humidity starts to grow as well, meaning that the primary pathologies that we'll see as we're getting into summer are the pathologies of both heat as well as dampness in the natural environment, which then means that summer heat damp presentation at the same time. Interestingly, in ancient times, the heart was associated with the earth phase as well as the fire phase. So those of you who are familiar with Dong's acupuncture, if anyone is, and if not, you can read about this later, the main point group that we use for the heart on the legs also is the main point group we use for spleen, stomach deficiency patterns. And it happens to be basically between the spleen and stomach channels on the upper thigh. If we look at the Shuanjiezi, which is this early dictionary of Chinese language from the Han Dynasty, the definition it gives us for the heart is ren xin tu zang. It's the human heart is the earth viscera. So in very ancient times, before we sort of settled on it, there were competing theories of, is the heart fire? Is the heart earth? And I'm going to say that if we look at something like the pericardium actually gives us a little bit of both. We use pericardium channel as much for heart problems as we do for digestive problems, right? And in early times, the pericardium channel was the heart channel, which is why the Lingshu rather tells us the source point of the heart is a daling, is pericardium, because the heart channel didn't get points until later. There were no heart channel points really until after the writing of the Suen and the Lingshu. Okay. So what does that mean? That means we're going to start seeing heat in the natural environment. We're going to start seeing increased dampness in the natural environment, which means that's what we have to take into consideration when we're looking at prevention and treatment. Okay. Sorry. My PowerPoint is going a little crazy today. Okay. Yeah, okay, so this is where we're supposed to be. So the basic do and avoid. So one of the things to do is preserve a good mood, nourish the heart, and thereby enter stillness. So even though this is the time of year to start expanding out, we also want to make sure we don't expand out too much, because then that's going to be too much of a movement of fire and yang. And so what we're going to try to do is avoid the heart fire becoming too exuberant, and we're trying to also avoid intemperance in food and drink. So allowing the heart fire growing out is good. Too much, we're going to start seeing heat patterns in our patients. We want to try to avoid that. It's going to be very easy, especially for patients who are prone to heat, to develop heat patterns this time of year going forward. The reason we want to be careful of intemperance in food and drink, or as I like to call it sometimes, gustatory debauchery, is because this will further burden the spleen and stomach, making us more prone to the external dampness in the environment, right? So we want to make sure that we're guarding against the dampness as well as the heat. So for those of you, if you're thinking about acupuncture recommendations in the clinic, if we see too much heat, especially in the heart, we can think about things like bleeding ear apex. And in terms of points, so these are Dong points, you can look them up, but Lingu basically is in the vicinity of large intestine 4. 7708 overlaps stomach 36, and 6605 is stomach 43. So we're looking at points that regulate the spleen and stomach. In your quiz, here's your quiz, think about it, we'll answer it shortly. Why are points like stomach 36 appropriate not only for dampness, maintaining health of spleen and stomach, but also good for clearing heart fire? Think about that, we'll come back to that shortly. So when we look at more specific recommendations, sorry, my screen is driving me crazy on this end of things. If we're looking at more specific recommendations in terms of diet, which is a big piece of the Yangsheng picture, we're looking at things like avoiding eating too much, overeating, especially of things that are very heavy, sweet, or greasy, right? Why? Because this places a burden on the spleen and stomach, which is, I don't know if you guys have the same tradition over there, but here in the United States, as we get into the summer, everyone likes to barbecue all sorts of really fatty, greasy meats, sausages, and they like to eat really heavy stuff. And this is like the wrong time of year to do that. They should be barbecuing outside in the winter, in my opinion. But, so this is something we have to be careful of overeating. Celebratory foods, in other words, these types of foods eaten once in a while, is not going to be the same problem as this habitual eating of these types of foods, right? So overeating these foods, consumption of overeating in general can cause internal heat that can worsen heart fire. Overeating in general creates that presentation of food stasis. And remember, what does stasis transform into? It transforms into heat. So this is an important aspect of Yangsheng. So we want to eat foods that are slightly sour, a little bitter, and foods that are light or gently cooling. Sour foods help build fluids unless your patient is overly damp, right? If they're already overly damp, we don't want too much sour. Slightly bitter will clear heat. So this is the time where bitter greens are appropriate. My background is primarily, even despite my name, I'm primarily Italian American. So like dandelion greens is a traditional food, like those bitter greens that we eat this time of year, and it's appropriate that it clears heat gently from the system. Light and gently cooling foods also, so they can counteract if there's too much fire building up in the heart. Fresh vegetables, other things that gently cool the body. Bananas, be careful with bananas because they can be damp forming if they're taken in excess. Peaches, plums, umeboshi, which are the pickled plums, in moderation. Asparagus, cucumber, corn, these are things that gently can clear heat from the body. Red foods are also appropriate this time of year. It goes in the law of signatures concept. Celery kanji, swanzaren kanji. So these are also things that you can make. So if you don't know how to make kanjis, you can look this up online. Kanjis is basically some sort of grain porridge, usually rice porridge. You can make it out of quinoa. Millet is also really good this time of year if you like millet porridges. And then into that you can add chopped celery. You can put some swanzaren, powdered swanzaren, or if you do granules, you can give your patients some granule powdered formulas. Just give them a swanzaren granule, have them stir it into some porridge in the morning, and that's a nice type of thing to eat this time of year. Yes, so the green part of watermelon is, or the white part of watermelon is also appropriate for this. And we'll see watermelon, it's a little early in the season for watermelon right now, but as things get hotter, we'll see watermelon being an essential sort of recommendation. Okay, so let's go in. Everyone okay for that? That's the beginning of summer. The next seasonal node is something called small fullness. And the dates that I give you on the handout are this year's dates. So May 21st this year is small fullness. The word xiaoman, the word man for fullness, is a reference not only to the spleen and stomach, interestingly enough, but the word man is also a reference to the winter wheat, which is almost about to be harvested. So one of the major grain sources in China traditionally was winter wheat, which would be planted basically in winter. It would eventually grow, and this is the time of year of harvest, right? So in this time of year of harvest, so that word man, fullness, refers to the gradual filling up, the gradual maturation of the winter wheat, which is being prepared for harvest in the next couple of seasonal nodes. So things are getting fuller and fuller, things are growing more and more and more, right? So here, what we want to do is, again, prevent the buildup of internal heat. A lot of these recommendations you'll see are fairly similar. But we also want to get rid of disease evils such as dampness. Now, what we're starting to see during this and the next seasonal node through May, which is here we're seeing it right now, we're seeing increase in dampness, increase in heat, but we're not in the middle of summer when heat is clearly the most dominant weather pattern. So for example, it's going to be in low 70s today. This past weekend here in where I am in the United States was in the 80s, which is quite warm, quite toasty. You can do your conversion to Celsius later. But interestingly, the evenings can still be actually fairly chilly, right? So tonight, when I'm done teaching my Tai Chi class, I'm done about 8, I'll be done at 9 p.m. It's going to be fairly cool getting out. So I brought my jacket with me. So we're still seeing this split between warmer days and sometimes cooler evenings where the dampness is still there. So this mix of both warm with dampness and cool with dampness means that the dampness in particular can be fairly problematic for people, right? So now we're having mix of hot and cold. So we can see dampness and heat from above and cold from the earth below, which means we can see symptoms of digestive problems, intermittent or ongoing diarrhea, nausea, poor appetite, fatigue. Where I am in the United States, we also have a lot, so pollen is everywhere. There's like, my car is coated with a thick sheet of yellow film from all the pollen, and that sort of environmental influence can also mean people feel fairly fatigued. So this time of year, we need to take that into consideration when we're looking at what are we doing in terms of treating patients. Okay. So one of the things we want to do is also avoid wildly fluctuating emotions and moods. So stay calm. It's a pretty heated year in the United States in general, as you all can well imagine. It's a pretty heated year, but across Europe, things are, I think everything is smoldering on fire slowly in different places. We don't have to get too much into the weeds there, but this is what we want to avoid. So in terms of diet, what we want to do, we want to look at foods that gently treat dampness, gently clear heat. So we see things like corn, adzuki beans, which are those little sort of reddish color beans that are quite good at draining dampness. Chixiaodou, we use it even as an herb in Chinese medicine to percolate dampness. Mung beans. Mung beans this time of year are particularly good at clearing heat. Winter melon. So if you're not in a part of the world where you can get winter melon, then a substitute for that is watermelon over time, right? Celery, cilantro, lily bulbs, and osmanthus. I'm not sure if you guys can get osmanthus, but osmanthus is a flowering citrus where the flowers themselves, they're going to start to bloom fairly shortly, have this very fragrant aromatic smell to it. Oftentimes we can get green oolongs from Taiwan scented with osmanthus flowers, and that's perfect. So like osmanthus oolongs, green oolongs, perfect for this time of year. Gently heat clearing, the aromatic nature of that flower gets rid of the dampness. So aromatic, like cilantro, that aromatic nature of cilantro also helps cut through dampness. So if people are particularly damp, these aromatic flavored things, even things like cardamom in moderation, just to help get rid of dampness, is very appropriate. Decrease oil, increase water consumption, not only because it's getting warmer, which means people can be dehydrated, but increasing water also percolates dampness, right? So it helps diurese the body. Avoid warm foods, such as deep fried foods, warmer meats such as lamb. This is not the time of year for lamb. Lamb is not even in season right now. Or greasy meats like goose. Have your goose in winter where you want that internal heat building up. If people have weak middle burners, you want to be careful about too much cooling things like the adzuki beans, the mung beans, right? Because they tend to be fairly cooling and put a burden on the digestive symptoms. So we want to use these types of foods that are gently heat clearing and damp draining with foods that strengthen the spleen, such as yams, sweet potatoes, beef broth, in moderation. Ren, which is the Job's tier barley, can also be made into congee, which is particularly appropriate for percolating dampness and strengthening the middle burner. You can think of other types of local grains that can be made into congees, but Ren, the Job's tier barley, is very, very appropriate. It's also gluten-free. It's not a true barley, so Ren should be gluten-free. Okay? And in terms of acupuncture, similar acupuncture points that are going to support the middle burner. Okay? Lingu, again, is near large intestine 4. Sihuashang is stomach 36. Menjin is stomach 43. Kaipi is a point that means open the spleen. For poor appetite, helps with digestion. It's on the middle of the pad of the middle finger. So if you find like right where the swirl of the fingerprint is, right on the middle finger, that's Kaipi. It hurts awful to needle it, so you can teach patients to do acupressure on it. It's an easy one for them to find. Sorry for the phone in the background. The answering machine is turned down, so you won't hear that, but this is still my office, so the phone may ring. For those of you who do Dong's acupuncture, you can look at these other points if people have diarrhea or digestive problems. And if you don't know these, don't worry about it. The stomach 36 and stomach 43 are also appropriate. Now, here's your quiz. Why is stomach 36 not only appropriate for spleen and stomach, but why, we can get out of here so we can discuss this shortly, why is it also appropriate for like heart fire? Think about it for a second. And this is the discussion that we had last, it wasn't this point, it was a different point, but this is the idea that we had last Friday with my intern in the clinic. So whenever you're thinking about these kinds of questions, you want to ask yourself, what's yin yang, 5-phase, what relationships are we looking at? Okay, so why is stomach, and if we look at TCM indications, we use stomach 36 for things like hypertension, right? It's a modern indication for stomach 36. We can use it for stroke, which is like fire upstirring. Why? You can use it for insomnia even. Why? So think about, so it definitely, right, so it has a supplementing effect on that. But even before you do that, I want you to think about what are the 5 phase relationships or the yin and yang relationships. And since we only have a half hour or so left, well, I can go a little later if you need to, if we need to. What is, all right, that's excellent, Alex. So earth is the child of fire, which means what does it do to fire? As the child of fire, what does it do? Right. So remember, chapter 69 of the Nanjing says, in vacuity, supplement the mother, in repletion, drain the child. Got it? In vacuity, supplement the mother. So if we have heart vacuity, we can treat heart vacuity by using wood. So on the heart channel, the supplementation point of the heart channel is the Jing well point because it's the wood point. If we want to sedate the heart or sedate fire in general, not only the heart, we can go to earth. Is it the child? So what is special about stomach 36 in terms of the point and the channel? Right, exactly. So stomach 36 is earth on earth, right? Which means in Chinese it's called the Bun Shui. Bun means origin, right? So it's the origin point, means it's the same phase, same channel. So that's what it's called in Chinese. It's the same phase point on the same channel, which means we can use earth on earth to drain fire. So if you're looking at, for example, like Saam acupuncture protocols or some Japanese acupuncture protocols, if they have heart fire, stomach 36 will be part of that. Maybe they won't do stomach 36. They might do on the spleen channel. They would do earth on the spleen channel. Like stomach 2 would be, or sorry, spleen 2 would be the point they would choose. But many Japanese acupuncturists play with the Saam people are very like, if it's yin channel, yang channel. Many of the Japanese acupuncturists are a little bit more loosey-goosey with, although don't eat goose this time of year, but otherwise they're loosey-goosey with this principle. So in my clinic, stomach 36 is a point frequently used for clearing heat in the appropriate case, right? We don't do that on patients who are maybe spleen deficient, but people who are full heat patterns, oftentimes this is a point that you can use to clear heat. Get it? Sometimes you'll see clusters of blood vessels around gallbladder 34, stomach 36, spleen 9, in which case you can bleed those to clear heat from heart as well. In Dong's acupuncture, that's one of the heart bloodletting zones. Everyone okay with that? Okay, so there's that. That's one of the reasons we can use that. Let's go back to the seasonal nodes because we have a couple more to get through. Okay. So I didn't go into so each of the seasonal nodes can be broken down into 3 smaller 5-day segments. It's just too much to go over all of it in a short period of time. But there are actually 72 micro seasons each year that we can see. This one is particularly interesting. So I gave you the name of the 5-day segments for bearded grain. So first, the name bearded grain is also another reference to the maturing crops. So the word here, mang, in Mangzhong, is a reference to the winter wheat that is finally coming to full maturation, that will be harvested. So harvest and renewal is a theme for this seasonal node. The word zhong here is a reference to the rice crops that are going to be planted for autumn harvest, right? So in China, traditionally, wheat was harvested this time of year, rice is harvested in the autumn. Okay? So this is the time of year where all the little seedlings are put into the paddies for the wet rice agriculture. So the names of the seasonal nodes that we have here are the praying mantises are born, shrikes, which is a type of bird, begin to sing, and the mockingbird ceases to vocalize. The interesting thing that we see here is that the praying mantises and the shrikes in particular, and even the next one says the mockingbirds stop vocalizing. These are images of basically the return towards the yin contracting, essentially the death phase. So praying mantises in their reproductive habits, the females cannibalize the males after the act of reproduction. And shrikes are deeply creepy birds, deeply creepy, because what they do is, if you can see, on the one side there's a thistle with an insect impaled on it, and the other side is basically a log of wood with a small lizard impaled on it. So what the shrikes do is they capture these animals and impale them alive on some pointy piece of vegetation and then come back later to eat them. So like I said, they're like the Vlad the Impaler of the bird world. They're deeply creepy birds. And what we're seeing is this image of everything is coming to growth. But what we're going to see in the very next seasonal node is the return to yin, the march toward that, what we call the death phase, or the phase of eventual complete storage before there's the renewal of springtime again. So the name of the seasonal node, harvesting of the wheat, planting of the rice, is basically the end of one and the beginning of something else. We're seeing these images of praying mantises. There's the death of one of the mating pair for the eventual reproduction of the next generation, or the shrikes are this harvesting, this reaping inwards. So this is the time of everything's coming to fullness, and then the only other place it can go is in the opposite direction towards the yin. Okay. Now, one of the recommendations that we give here is we start thinking of afternoon naps, right? Why afternoon naps? Because and we'll see this during summer solstice as well. The afternoon, Wu refers to the time of day of 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., right? So it's the 11 to 13 hour, which is at midday, highest of sun, noon. The highest of noon is the image of the summer solstice, right? So the reason we're starting to see, let's start taking a nap during this time of day, is twofold. One is because it's the hottest time of day. So it's the time of day you want to not be working outside. If we work, for example, especially if you're thinking of an agrarian society, this is the time of day where we're most at risk for sunstroke, most at risk for excess sun exposure. So this is the time of day where you take your siesta, where you take a little bit of a break, and then go back to work later when the sun is starting to go down again. It also is, if you imagine that yin-yang symbol, right, the Taijitu, right? We've all seen this symbol where you have white on one side, black on one side, but in the biggest piece of white, you have a black dot. The biggest piece of black, you have a white dot. Because those dots represent the solstices. So we're getting really close to the solstice now. So the way we put the black dot in the white is by taking a little nap, or at least resting during that most yang period of the day, to give my body the symbol, okay, now we're starting to take it easy during that most yang period, preparing us for the yin that's going to start growing eventually. So the afternoon nap is a traditional Yangsheng recommendation for this time of year. Another basic Yangsheng recommendation is regularly clear toxins, heat toxins, water toxins. So again, we want to make sure that the environment is free of this dampness. We're getting more and more heat, more and more dampness in the environment. So this is a time of year in particular to keep things clean, even in your environment, right? Hotter and wetter means molds can be growing inside houses. Keep the bathroom clean. Check those crevices where molds can start growing so as to keep the environment free of things that might essentially poison us. Okay. This is the time of year where traditionally things like mugwort would be harvested. We're getting into the time of year where mugwort harvesting happens. And so in my clinic, right in the entryway, there's mugwort I harvested last year around this time of year. You hang it up to ward off the negative yin. And in actual practicalities, the harvesting of aromatic herbs and keeping them around the house would ward off things like insects. Ants are starting to come in my house now. They're going after the pet food. I have to make sure after we feed the cats and the dog, we take up the extra food so it keeps things clean so ants won't start infesting everything. So this is the time of year we're seeing more insect infestation in houses, mold infestation in houses. So part of Yangsheng is keeping things clean. Tea tree oil, white vinegar if you want to avoid like chemical cleaners, but try to keep things mold free and clean. Okay. The diet recommendations are going to be fairly similar, so we don't have to spend as much time on it. We want to try to cut back on the sour foods. Why? Because there's more dampness in the environment, more bitter. So this is time especially for bitter greens, right? Heat clearing foods, bland foods. Why? Because the bland foods also percolate dampness. So melons, fruits, leafy greens. Try to avoid really very, very sweet fruits like pineapples, though, because they can create more dampness. But other fruits can gently clear dampness. More vegetarian meals. Beans in particular also percolate dampness. Okay. If you have qi deficient patients, they can eat mildly warming fruits like cherries, lychees, longyens, apricots. These are the few fruits that tend to be more warming. So if patients are prone to heat, I don't know if you guys get lychees there. I love lychees. I wait this time of year for lychee season all the time. But if you eat too much lychees, it can actually create too much heat in the body. If they tend to be hot, more cooling foods such as watermelon, bananas. Again, be careful of bananas too much because they can be damp forming. Pears, tomatoes, persimmons, cucumbers. Cucumbers and watermelon in particular are very heat clearing. You can juice them as well. Patients can juice cucumbers, juice watermelon. Okay. Again, minimize greasy foods and meats. This is a traditional recipe for this time of year, licorice and mung bean congee. So basically what you're going to do is essentially make a congee out of mung beans. This is time of year in China where people get mung bean soup as a dessert soup. So mung beans that are so you can see it has sugar to taste. So if patients are particularly sugar sensitive, then just be cautious about how much sugar. But this is a fairly cooling, detoxifying type of food. It can be in as a dessert soup or just taken as a daily substance if people tend to be very, very hot. Okay. You can take a look at the recipe and try that later yourself. There's lots of YouTube videos on making mung bean soup as well if you want to look them up. The acupuncture is similar to the previous seasonal node. The next one here we're going to getting into is summer solstice. The summer solstice is symbolized by this hexagram with the yin line at the bottom. The way the lines, they start from the bottom, work their way up. This is because when we reach summer solstice, which this year is June 21st, this is the longest day of the year, but the very next day is slightly shorter. The very next day is slightly shorter. So this is the dot in the biggest piece of white where yin is being born again. This is also why the next two seasonal nodes are getting hotter and hotter. Think of it like a train, like a locomotive. If the locomotive is going in this direction, it weighs how many tons, right? If it's going in this direction and you want to go in the opposite direction, so this is yang, 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 yang. You want to eventually go yin, 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 yin. Summer solstice is the switch where the universe says, stop, no more yang, let's go yin. But what happens if you're driving a car that weighs a ton or two? If you're going yang, 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 and the train is how many tons? You hit the brakes, guess where it's going to go? It doesn't stop on a dime and then go backwards, right? You hit the brakes, and what does it do? It keeps on going forward, but it slows down. And then only after it's slowed down and the wheels go in the opposite direction does it slowly start and then go faster and faster in the opposite direction. So summer solstice is when that's the break, but it's still going to get hotter and hotter and hotter for a short period of time, even though the grass isn't growing as much, right? So Americans are fanatics when it comes to grass lawns. I personally don't like it, but I got to keep up with the Joneses, so we got to mow the lawn. Can't let it go crazy. Right now, the lawn is crazy because it's young. By July and August, even though it's hot, lawn, I don't have to mow every 2 weeks is fine. You don't have to mow the lawn so much. Why? Because even though it's hot, it's starting to go yin already. Get the idea? So the reason summer solstice is that switch, and then slowly we're going to go in the other direction of more yin. So this is the apex of yang, but the birth of yin in this trigram or this hexagram. So very, very similar recommendations in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Mainly, we want to be careful of heat and dampness in the environment. Now, dampness is becoming more and more of a strategy. I know that England is a very dry climate. I say that facetiously, of course, but dampness is starting to build up more and more. So we have to make sure that that becomes not a problem. We want to dress appropriately for the weather. We also, since the sun is getting higher and higher and higher in the sky, want to be careful of too much sun exposure. This is especially important for patients who may either be sick or elderly, who don't tolerate as much sun exposure, or, and this is as equally an important part of Yangsheng as anything else from 2,000 years ago, patients on medications, certain medications may make them more sensitive to the sun. Examples are tetracyclines, so certain antibiotics, quinolones such as Cipro or Celebrex, or such as Cipro. Celebrex is not antibiotic, but Celebrex also makes people more sensitive to the sun. Certain types of chemotherapy drugs can make people sensitive to the sun. Even herbs like, what's the herb that everyone takes that they shouldn't take for depression? It's out of my head right now. St. John's wort. Yeah. So don't have patients take St. John's wort. It interacts with every drug under the sun and makes them photosensitive. So this time of the year, patients, this is why you need to do an adequate history on your patient's Western medication usage as well as supplement usage. Even though you're not prescribing these things, they might not have heard from their doctor, oh, if they're on Cipro or whatever the brand name is you guys use over there. These are American brand names. Cipro is an American brand name. You have to look up the equivalent brand names over there. You may be the first person to say that, oh, you might get more sunburn on medication, be careful. And it's appropriate for us as healthcare providers to do that, make sure they know, okay? Or have them check with their pharmacist for recommendations. So this time of year, as sun is becoming most direct, be careful, right? If patients have heat that you can identify in certain channels, bloodletting, Jing-Well points, effective channels is an appropriate treatment strategy. Okay. We talked about why sleeping around the hour is appropriate, so that we don't have to go over again. Particularly the food recommendations are fairly similar. This is the time of year where I like to start adding huoshang to patient formulas, which is the agastache. It helps with clearing dampness. Formulas like huoshang zhengqisan are appropriate for people who have digestive problems associated with summer heat. Okay. This is a fun little recipe you can play with. This is Goya champuru. When I lived in Japan, I lived down in Okinawa. This is a local Okinawan recipe. And Goya is bitter melon. So if you like bitter melon, this is a great little recipe. And you can, again, YouTube has plenty of videos of how to make bitter melon not totally bitter. Okay. So minor heat, we're just going to go through these quickly. Minor heat and great heat. These are, again, fairly similar basic recommendations. I think we're starting to get some idea of the recommendations. Foods, again, similar. This is also the sort of what a lot of our patients may not understand is one aspect of Yangsheng is to be careful about cold exposure even in the summer. I know in Great Britain, you guys aren't as crazy about air conditioning as we are in the United States, but it's like I go into a supermarket in the United States in the summer, I am chilled more than I am in half of the winter because the air conditioning is cranked so strong that the difference, it can be easily in Fahrenheit, a 30-degree difference between supermarket and outside, which is not so healthy going back and forth. So people should be particularly cautious of exposure to cold through man-made sources. Again, most Europeans are not as crazy about air conditioning as Americans are, but that may vary depending on where you are and people's individual comfort level. So be careful of that kind of cold exposure. So let's go through some of this. I want to talk briefly about this idea. So when we are getting into the hotter months, we start seeing this Yangsheng concept of Dongbing Shazhi, which means treating winter disease in the summer, or treating winter disease ahead of time. So there's this quote from chapter 5 of the Suen that says the qi of strong fire weakens, right? So too much summer heat, for example, can make people faint. Like heat stroke, fainting is a symptom of heat stroke. Where strong fire feeds on qi, but strong fire disperses qi, the qi of strong fire weakens, strong fire disperses, right? So this can disperse heat, but the same passage basically says that the mild fire can strengthen qi, right? So if you go and look at the full, I think I missed giving you the full quote. The full quote says that small fire will strengthen the qi. So this is the time of year that we can start, especially for people who are very depleted, start applying preventive moxibustion therapy. So for example, in the Heart Classic of Bien Chui, it suggests this is the time from the transition between summer and fall, which is this time of year, since fall starts in August, that we start applying moxibustion prophylactically. So the recommendation is the application of 300 moxicones every 3 years for people over the age of 30, every 2 years for people over the age of 50, and yearly over the age of 60. So that means by the time patients are 60, or if they're just depleted, we do 300 cones of moxibustion, not in one setting. So when they say 300 cones of moxibustion, they don't mean do 300 cones on that one day. They mean do maybe 9 cones a day or 10 cones a day, especially, in my opinion, the Japanese rice grain moxa tends to be most efficient for this. Gentle heat almost every day or every couple of days, starting this time of year to prepare the body for the colder seasons to come. Okay, so that's something to take into consideration. What I'd like to do is jump ahead to one last thing before we adjourn for the day. And this is the idea of, you can read the rest of this as well. I want to talk briefly and introduce Sanfu Moxa, because this is the time of year where we start doing this thing called Sanfu Moxa. Hopefully some of you have heard of this concept of Sanfu Moxa, but if not, I'll define it and give you a basic idea. So Sanfu Moxa is another example of treating winter disease in the summer, and it's also an example of what we call Tianzhou, heavenly moxibustion, which is, rather than using burning mugwort, we're applying heat therapy, because the word zhou doesn't mean moxa with a moxa pole. That's specifically aizhou, which is mugwort moxibustion. The word zhou simply means cautery therapy or heat therapy applied to the surface of the body. Certain types of moxibustion are using warming herbal medicines, not necessarily mugwort, applied on acupuncture points topically for some therapeutic or preventive purpose. So what Sanfu Moxa is treatment done during what are called the Sanfu Tian, or the Sanfu days. They're in the I don't know if they use this term in the UK. In the United States, we call them the dog days of summer, which are the hot days of summer near the tail end of summer, basically in July and August. So what they are the 3 10-day periods that are the hottest time of the year. So they're happening basically mostly in July and the beginning of August. So the end of summer, beginning of autumn in the Chinese calendar. And the way that they're calculated is based on the Chinese calendar. So this is just a screenshot of my phone app, Chinese calendar. I gave you the dates, so if you don't have to calculate them yourself. So they are on the way we calculate it is based on the Chinese calendar, starting the 3rd Gung day after the summer solstice. So if you don't have any idea what we're talking about, don't worry about it right now. If you want a reference for Chinese calendars and you email me, I can give you some book recommendations. But the Gung day, so these have to do with the heavenly stems. So every 10 days, we go through fire, fire, because the 10 stems are the 5 phases in yin and yang. So fire, fire, earth, earth, sorry, fire, fire, sorry, I'm sorry, scratch that, start again. Wood, wood, we start from wood, then go fire, fire, then we go earth, earth, yang and yin, metal, yang and yin, then water, yang and yin, then it goes back to wood again, since wood starts the cycle. This calendar has been kept in the traditional Chinese history going back thousands of years. So for example, today, I haven't actually checked the calendar today. Today is a Yang Wood Day. So today happens to be the beginning of the 10-day cycle, Yang Wood cycle. The way that we calculate these hottest days of the year are going from the Yang metal days. So Gung is the Yang metal day. So based on the calendar, we count the 3rd Yang metal day after the summer solstice. So we can see here, this is June 21st. So 5/2 is just the day I took the screenshot. So this June 21st is the summer solstice, right? So we go to the next Gung day, and then the next one and the next one, which the punchline, just to give it to you, for this year, July 20th is the first of that 10-day period of time. 10 days later is July 30th. 10 days later is August 9th. So during that basically month of time is when we apply this therapy. Traditionally, it was used to treat respiratory disorders, such as asthma, tendency to upper respiratory tract infections, weak lung qi, any sort of lung problems. And we count the Gung day because the Gung is the Yang metal day, which means that this is the appropriate day to stimulate the lungs, especially the Yang of the lungs. So applying this moxibustion therapy on that day has the greatest effect at stimulating the Yang of the lungs. So essentially what we're trying to do is the hottest time of the year, we're using really, really hot drugs, hot herbs, and we're essentially supercharging the Yang of the lungs from the time of the year, the astrological day of the calendar, and the points we're going to be choosing. So basically, here's how you do it. We're going to make a powder. Traditionally, we would be using BAcC, Yanhu, so mustard seed, corydalis, gansui, and xixin, those 4 herbs. BAcC and Yanhu are 2 parts each, so you maybe use like 30 grams of each of those. Gansui and xixin, 15 grams of each of those. Powder it to a fine powder. This would be mixed with ginger juice or water if the patient's very sensitive. Ginger juice makes it hotter, right? And then you take maybe a pea size of this plaster and we apply them to points related to the lungs. So traditionally we'd use points like Fei Shu, bladder 13, Gao Huang Shu, bladder 43, Bai Lao. You can use other points, but they're on the BAcC shu points or points related to the BAcC shu points. You tape down this paste and the patient leaves it on for no more than 1 or 2 hours because it will create a chemical burn, which is then a type of moxibustion. And then they take it off, rinse their back. And you do this on the beginning of each of those days. So this year, you do this on July 20th, July 30th, and August 9th, or as close to those days as you can get. When I was doing my hospital-based externship in Chengdu, there were signs all over the hospital, because I was there in the summer. Not the best of time to visit Chengdu if you don't like hot. That time of year, there were signs everywhere. And all over Beijing at TCM clinics, you can see signs this time of year. It says, come on these days so we can apply this mustard plaster to your back. Yes, so this will be recorded. Okay, that was that question. Leave it on a short period of time. The patient, if they leave it on too much, they will get a scarring burn. So my suggestion is have them leave it on for just to begin with an hour or so. And if it starts irritating them, then they can peel off the plaster. If it's really, really burned, then you can apply some like aloe cream afterwards, or don't do the second and third application. So traditionally, this would be done each year for 3 years, and people will notice a significant improvement in their lung disorders coming in in the winter. Um, yeah, the Korean tradition is in Korean medicine. The tradition is rather than doing the application of the plasters on these points, they will eat Korean soup. Korean ginseng and chicken soup. So you stew like that hot Korean ginseng with chicken soup and have chicken soup on each one of those 3 days. And that's the traditional Korean Sanfu period recommendation. Now, I don't know if you, let's get out of here for a second. Um, I know that you may have herb restrictions in the UK that we may not have in the United States. So, for example, gansui is fairly toxic, and it's actually hard to get. Most American practitioners even have a hard time getting it. I get it because I know my pharmacy owners, and we have a good relationship for a couple decades. Um, and shishin is an Aristolochia, so that also may be hard to get. So if you wanted to do a less or a non-toxic version, I'll type this in the chat. A non-toxic version of the formula you can use is BAcC. I'm just going to give you the Chinese names. You can look up the Latin if you don't know the Chinese names. Yanhusuo, which are both, so BAcC is just mustard seed. That's an easy thing to get. Ganjiang, which is dried ginger. Rogui, which is cinnamon. And wujuyu, I think that's a Vodia fruit. So you can use these 5 herbs instead as a powder that you can then, or as a formula that you can then powder. I would do the BAcC and the Yanhusuo 2 parts and the Ganjiang Rogui and Wujuyu 1 part each. So you can also use that. You won't get nearly as, although the mustard seed will still make it fairly irritating, but that can be used as a non-toxic version of the formula if you have a hard time getting those 4 herbs. Okay, so just as you're going. So that's a very basic introduction to Sanfu Moxa. If you want to read more about Sanfu Moxa, I highly recommend there it is. My friend Lorraine Wilcox she's written a couple books on moxibustion in general. So she wrote an article for the Journal of Chinese Medicine back in 2009 on Sanfu Moxa and lung-related disorders. And that's on the Journal of Chinese Medicine website. I'm sure you can purchase access to that for a fairly low fee. It's an excellent overview of Sanfu Moxa, its application, and it describes some of the modern research on Sanfu Moxa. But I would do that. You have time to get it ready for this year if you want to do it. And her article is a good reference, and you can always email me if you want troubleshooting pointers. The last I gave you is just 2 formulas from the Zunshen Badian. These are formulas that are Yangsheng formulas for summer. Notice, of course, that what a lot of them are doing is maintaining spleen and stomach, right? So even though this is the fire phase, because of the dampness in the environment, it's also important to worry about the spleen and stomach, okay? So there's some references for you if you want to, this will be in the handouts, of course, if you want to see the references. If you want to contact me, these are some of my websites. The dongacupuncture.eu is under construction, so it's not up yet. For those of you who are interested in Dong's acupuncture, I will be in Ireland, in Dublin, in September, teaching Dong's acupuncture. So you can email me for more details, and the details will be on the dongacupuncture.eu website. I used to teach quite a bit in the EU until the pandemic and everything went south, literally, not figuratively, because I'm not south of the EU teaching. But I'm trying to get more of my EU teaching back up and running again. Okay, questions before we call it a day? Anything that's burning questions?
So
The good of the
thank you so much, Henry. Yeah, so feel free to put your questions in the chat or unmute if you like to ask Henry. I have one in the meantime.
Sure.
Just occurred to me that so when you think about the framework of the 4 seasons, and
Mm,
you have water, wood, spring, and then summer is fire, and then you've got metal in the autumn.
yeah.
That I've always wondered about this disconnect between fire and metal because in the flow of the five elements, metal flows into water quite, you can understand it.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
goes
sure.
in and down water into wood, fire. Now fire goes up and out, right? So
Right.
how does it get captured again to get back into metal,
Yeah.
that chi?
It's
And,
it's a
and so, yeah, go on.
it's an excellent, excellent question. And if we had time, we could talk more about it. I don't
But
have
it
it.
just made me think that
Yeah.
the sample tier is a perfect remedy for that, isn't it? It's
Right.
bringing the fire into
Yeah.
metal and making that connection. So yeah, this is a big topic, but for those who don't
Right.
necessarily know what I'm talking about, is that you can in the beginning of the Neijing, they really focus on four elements, four
Right.
seasons, and almost like Earth is an emergent property, isn't it? The
Which it is.
transformation,
Absolutely. Because
and
Earth. Yeah.
and so if you've got the fire of summer and then the metal of autumn,
Right.
I mean, fire, yeah, fire controls metal, isn't it? So this is
Right.
interesting. Yeah.
So there is in the Nanjing, and I don't remember the chapter number off the top of my head, because if you think the Neijing is obscure, the Nanjing is really, really obscure because it's very terse. It's like the book is actually only like that big, and it's the commentary that's this big. There's a chapter on the Nanjing that I like to call it the there's a lot of weird things in the Nanjing because they're trying to explain the five phase theory, and one of the questions there is if the lungs, if you speak, right, lungs make you speak, right? The air coming through the vocal cords, lungs make sound, right? Why is it that the kidneys govern the ears, right? Why not? Why do the lungs? Because the
Mm.
lungs go with sound, but the kidneys hear things. Like why? What's the disconnect? And if the nose smells odors, odors go with the heart, right? Why? What's the disconnect? And they say there is, and this is one of the things I wish we would teach our students. So everything we teach you in terms, just like the lung we talked about earlier, the lung is metal. The lung is also wood, which is why it
Mm.
goes to 3 to 5 a.m., which is wood time of day, because the lung is complicated. The lung has various movements of all sorts. One of the concepts that we don't really talk about, which I wish we had time for, if you email me later, Alex, I can send you the reference if you have Unschild's translation of the Nanjing, he describes it in the commentary. There is a cycling of the five phases called basically like the cycling of birth, flourishing, eventually like going into decline and decaying cycle, which is a traditional cycle. So imagine that everything is a 12-step cycling, right? So step number one is infancy. It's just birth. You're a gleam in your parents' eyes at step one. And then eventually you eventually will be born, you'll
Yeah.
mature, you'll eventually like take over. And so they call it something like Shima Shima Wang. It's like flourishing as ruler. I don't remember the first character for the Wang. Flourishing as king, right? And that's so like right now, fire is flourishing as king.
Mm.
Okay. But eventually it goes into decline, and then you have like shuai, decline,
Yeah.
si, death, and then you have like mu, like a
Mm.
tomb. Like everything's like if after you're dead, you're in the ground, you're entombed before you have the birth again. All of the five phases are present all of the time.
Mm.
It's just in one of those steps of the 12. So right now, we are in the flourishing of fire, and we're just at the point where water is dead, buried, and it will be born again. So water is present even now, but in its infancy. And eventually, so imagine you have like 12, like
Mm.
the dial with 12 segments on it, but they're like this. So right now, summer is here, water is here, wood and metal are here. So metal is right now, metal's a teenager, right? Metal's a teenager because it's right now fire is in charge, but eventually
Mm.
metal is slowly growing up, and pretty soon,
I see.
pretty soon it's going to say, fire, you're retired, I'm taking
Mm.
over. but fire's not dead yet. Fire's not dead until November, December, right? So there's this interesting cycling that we think, okay, this is fire summer, but all the
Mm.
5 phases are present right now. They're just in various different stages of growth,
Okay.
maturation, and development, right?
Mm.
Email me
Interesting.
later. I'll send you the chapter reference, and you can read
No,
Unschild's
that'd be great.
description of it, because Unschild gives us a good description in the commentary in the Nanjing. Um, yeah, but it's interesting. So it's about everything is always happening. It's just what's dominant at any given time. All right. Any other questions?
Any other questions, anyone? Feel free to unmute if you like,
Yeah,
or
please.
um, or drop one in the chat.
I know you guys.
Um,
It's getting later for you, but look, the sun is still. Alex, the sun is still out
I
behind.
know. Look at my window.
That's
It's
right.
amazing. Northern Hemisphere,
That's right.
isn't it? Isn't it?
Even further north than us, this is
Yeah.
that's why this is summer. Right.
And we're
That
not even
window
in
right there.
midsummer yet.
Yeah.
Um, well, if there aren't any other questions to come in, I'll just I mean I have a million for Henry, but I want to let him get away as well. But thank you so much, Henry.
Thank you.
And just want to remind everyone about our conference, our Cycles of Life conference, which is on June 6th and 7th. Sorry, 7th and 8th. We've got our extra day shaping the future together on the 6th as well. Check all of them out. We can continue all of these ideas there. Henry, we've got Elizabeth Rashad de la Valle is coming in person, so we're very
Excellent.
happy about that. And also Deborah
Excellent.
Wolf as well, who's another
Oh,
great
excellent.
cycles person as well. So,
Absolutely. Excellent.
um, yeah, we really love to see you there. Check out the website. But thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you. Thank you for
There's
inviting
lots
me.
of thanks in the chat.